Thank you very much. James John Walker, known as Gentleman Jim, was a mayor of New York. He drove a Duesenberg, he married a chorus girl, and he had a wonderful time between 1925 and 1932 when he had to skip the country right ahead of the sheriff. But that's another matter. Boys will be boys. He was such an exemplar of the spirit of New York that he once said, "It is better to be a lamppost in New York than to be mayor of Chicago." But by the mid-1960s in this last century, it was better to be a lamppost in New York than to be mayor of New York. Such was the decline that when Bill Buckley ran for mayor in 1963, at his announcement, he was asked what would be the first thing he'd do if he were elected. He said, "Demand a recount." It's understandable, because the conventional wisdom about New York was that to be mayor of New York was to go into a political dead end, and that it was impossible to govern the city. Well, the idea that it leads nowhere to be mayor of New York is an interesting one. Only 3 presidents were ever former mayors. Andrew Johnson, about whom the less said the better, was mayor of Greenville, Tennessee. A mayor of Buffalo, Grover Cleveland, became the last Democrat you could seriously trust in the White House. And a former mayor of Northampton, Massachusetts, Calvin Coolidge, became the last president with whom I, for one, fully agreed. And it has been 190 years since a mayor of New York was elected to a higher office, DeWitt Clinton, governor of New York. And when I say that being mayor of New York is demanding, I mean this. It has more people than do 39 other states. It is more difficult to govern than any of the 50 states. This for a reason. New York City has been liberalism's laboratory in the 20th century, which means it is a seriously troubled place, or was. It produced a culture of complaint, which led to the politics of victimhood, which led to government by grievance groups, and the learned dependency of an overdeveloped welfare state. But then along came a man who said the following: "Millions of people from all over the world have come to New York City. They didn't come here to be taken care of and to be dependent on city government. They came here for the freedom to take care of themselves." The man who said that was a man who understood that one of New York's intractable problems, the intergenerational transmission of poverty, was not the result of racism and not the result of some flaw in the American economic system, but the result largely of dysfunctional behavior. It was a man who said 70% of all New York's long-term prisoners and 75% of all adolescents charged with murder come from homes without fathers. Therefore, the best social program you could have in New York would be called fatherhood. This is a man who said of the public school system, "It is time to go to a choice system and break up the monopoly." It was a man who fought bilingual education because it does produce linguistic ghettos. It was a man who restored City University to what it hitherto had been. It had been the Harvard of the working classes. It had been the key to upward mobility. And then in the 70s, it went to a program of open admissions and no longer became an avenue of upward mobility. The next speaker ended open admissions because he believes, as the poet Robert Frost believes, that he does not want to live in a homogenized society. He wants the cream to rise. Yeah. If you want to know the difference this speaker has made in his domain, think of the New York First of Breakfast at Tiffany's, that movie that was a hymn to the elegance of New York in the 1950s. By the time the next speaker came to office, it had become the New York of bonfire of the vanities. This started under a mayor, Mayor Lindsay, who, Michael Barone, who's with us today and who knows more about American politics than the next 6 claimants to that title combined. Michael said of Mr. Lindsay, he was the most destructive local official of the last half-century. Under Mr. Lindsay and his welfare administrator, Michael Ginsburg, known as Michael Come and Get It Ginsburg, the welfare rolls went from 200,000 to 800,000, and New York soon would lose its very self-government, its right to control its own budget. Well, under your next speaker, New York City welfare rolls shrank by 600,000. The murder rate... Murders declined 67%. The city budget in his 8 years increased at only 2.9% a year, less than half of what the federal government has increased in the last 7 years. He lowered city taxes so that for a family of 4 earning $50,000, their city tax bill declined 24%. When he first came into office, the city confronted a deficit, and he was handed a study done by the previous administration, recommended by the New York Times, that said the way to balance the budget was with taxes and fees. Your next speaker took the budget and literally dropped it in the garbage. After 9/11, some deep thinkers asked him, would this be a good time to save the city by increasing taxes? And he said, and I quote, that was a dumb, stupid, idiotic, and moronic idea. Michael Barone has written that your next speaker improved the quality of everyday life for ordinary Americans in the 1990s more than any other politician in the nation. I would go, Michael, one better. I would say that your next speaker produced the 8 most consecutive years of successful conservative governance in the 20th century in America. Now, ladies and gentlemen, conservatism, as we all know, comes in many flavors. And there are many fine conservatives competing for the attention and the affection of all the people in this room. Your next speaker's conservatism is the flavor of Margaret Thatcher's, of whom it was said she could not pass a government institution without swatting it with her handbag. Your next speaker grew up in Brooklyn when the Dodgers were still there and nevertheless rooted for the Yankees. Obviously, your next speaker is someone who is spoiling for a fight. Ladies and gentlemen, I give to you a man for whom pugnacity is a political philosophy, Rudolph Giuliani.